So, hey, Frank, good morning.
Morning, Kristin.
How's the weekend for you so far? It's early.
Yeah,
We're
well, it's not
starting.
raining for a change, and
Yeah,
that's a break over here.
yeah, it's been raining a lot. All right, so this time in our um, Go Digital or Die series for baby boomer business owners, I'll never be able to say that fast.
We'll get there.
Yeah, what we want to do is talk about the basics of technology because you can't manage what you don't understand.
Mhm.
And I think there are a lot of baby boomers who just said, I can't deal with this. I'll just hire people and let them do it. And the problem with that is then you're in the dark and you don't know if you're making good decisions or not. You don't know if what they're doing is appropriate. So we're going to talk about the basics
I
of the
think
web.
a good idea to do that, in part because there's also a lot of people on the technical side of this who aren't shy about making people like us feel foolish for what we
Yes, they
don't
actually
know.
make money on that.
Exactly.
They make more if we're stupid, and that's not good. That's just not a good thing.
Yep.
And we don't like that, you and I. That makes
Nope.
us angry,
Nope.
actually. Okay, so I think the first thing I want to do today is talk about how the web, what the elements of the web are, right?
Hmm.
So we have the basic, I want to talk about the cloud for a second first, because everybody talks about it like it's some thing out there, some magical
Right.
unicorn rainbow thing. And it's not. It's just a bunch of smart computers, powerful computers sitting in racks in data centers. And
Most importantly, it's other people's computers that you're using.
yes, exactly.
If anybody can take away anything, that's the one thing, is that's the beauty of the cloud, is that somebody else is worrying about the computers. You're just using them.
That's right. That's right. And they are the hosts of your site. So
Yep.
yeah, you rent space, as you said in our last video, on their
Mhm.
site or in their server. All right, so that's where your site lives, and who you pick as a host, it makes a big difference because sites go down, sites get screwed up somehow, somebody does something simple in the back end, and your site's down for 18 minutes. And you really need to know who to call, and they really need to be responsive.
That's right.
So it's really important to get that under control and to ask around and find good hosts, right?
And I don't know if it's helpful, but it's probably a good idea to observe the difference between hosting and the cloud.
Okay,
Because
good.
people are accustomed to hearing the term hosting, and that takes on different dimensions. There are organizations that will host your website for you. You all see the GoDaddy commercials, companies like that, and they provide a certain type of service oriented primarily around hosting websites and web presences. There are places like Rackspaces, I mean, you hear a lot where their primary focus tends to be more hosting your computers in their buildings, but you're still responsible for them. And there's good reasons for doing that. And then there's the cloud, which is a little more amorphous. And that's just this infinitely expandable cloud of processing of computer power that you can tap into. And it behaves a little bit differently. And you interact with those vendors a little bit differently. And that's often where you end up going when you're building larger scale applications, trying to reach a very wide audience of people. And that may become clear as we go along, but it's good to kind of remember those different tiers.
Yeah, and the cloud, the word the cloud, it's kind of interesting to me because I was doing a lot of work for telecom companies years ago, and we did so many diagrams showing computers, then the local area network, and then going out to the wide area network, and then which now people just think of as broadband, just fast connections out to the cloud. And we always showed all the telephone company stuff, all the switching systems and all that as a cloud. And
I think
it's,
that's where the term came from. I
I
mean, that's
do too.
it grew out of that.
Yeah, the diagram determined the language.
Mhm.
Um,
But it's a good metaphor because as customers of the cloud, we don't really need to worry about what's inside of it, how it's structured, where things are. And that's kind of the difference between what I consider hosting and the cloud. It's a little bit more amorphous, and it's a lot more flexible and a lot more expandable. Elastic is the word that we use in the industry. And it's just a different relationship with computing than you have if you're going with a hosting facility.
Yeah. Okay. That's good. And there are people who host, so to speak, your URL, the DNS host. So your website is actually a number like 168.92 dot whatever. And people don't want to type that in. They want to type in Chicago Partners or Applied Visions or
Right.
ABI.com. So the DNS registrar changes the number to a URL that human beings can type. One thing that scares me about people who don't understand what's going on is they don't realize that somebody else might actually own their URL. So if you get, and that stands for Universal Resource Locator, I think that's what
Right.
acronym stands for.
We
And
have no lack of acronyms in this
no,
business.
no, definitely not. DNS stands for Domain Name Server. Okay. So you can have a developer create your site and buy your URL for you. Let's say you've started a new site and it's a new URL, and you don't even realize until you go to another developer someday because you've stopped using that developer that you don't own your own domain.
I've seen that a lot. Yeah, domain name is probably the word you want to hang on to. URL is more general. Everything has a URL, every picture, every whatever, but the domain name is the thing you want to own. And I'm sure you've seen that a lot of times. I've seen that a lot of times where customers find out that an unscrupulous vendor has registered everything in their name, and then you can't get it back from them unless they're cooperative.
Or you pay them, or whatever.
Them. That's how you can be cooperative.
Yeah, they can disappear, which is a little scary.
Too. Yeah, and then there's a lot of hoops you have to jump through to deal with getting those things back again.
That's right.
There's so many identities. The industry for years used to talk about going to single identities, but now we, as entities in the internet world, have so many identities. You have your domain name for your web presence, you have your Twitter handles, you have your LinkedIn, all these different identities require an awful lot of management. And again, if you're not careful who's managing that for you, they can give you a hard time.
Yeah, and one of the things that happens if we pick up a new client and they are a small company who has just turned this over to somebody like their nephew or something, or a developer, and they just don't even worry about those intellectual property items. And in order for us to start working on their stuff, we need passwords, and we need to be able to get into the back end of those systems, and they don't even know their passwords. Right. and usernames. It's really, really important to have that information documented. We tend to use something called LastPass. There's another one called Dashlane, and those help you keep track of all your passwords. I have hundreds of passwords now.
Oh,
so
yeah.
No way I can keep it in my little notebook anymore.
Yeah, fortunately and unfortunately, there's dozens of password keeper programs. So finding one that you like and works for you will take some work as well. But those two that you listed are great, and there's others as well.
And the good news about those, especially for a company like mine, where I have about 30 people and they're all over the country, is that we want to keep our clients' information secure. So our team members can log in using LastPass, but they never see the passwords.
Right.
And we just, if it's time to let that person go or they move on or whatever, we can keep that secure by just stopping them from being able to get into LastPass.
Yeah, it's security practices is probably the stuff of a whole another session.
Yeah, but definitely. We should do that.
Yeah, we should. And, efficient and effective password management is where it starts, because for the time being, most things still rely on passwords. We're getting more into two-factor authentication, other ways of logging in, which is terrific. But right now, passwords are still the most important thing. And keeping track of them and managing them and holding them safe is very important.
And using good ones.
Yeah, and using good ones.
Yeah, I've started letting Dashlane generate, XW752 exclamation point.
Yeah, that's one of the benefits of those. When they work well for you and they're installed properly, they'll let you do things like that. You don't have to know the password anymore. They'll just manage it for you.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the cloud. We could go into a lot more detail, and I have an article written that helps people, and there are a lot of things that you can Google and find more information about it. But that from a everything that we're doing here in this series is from a management perspective.
Right.
For the business leader, business owner, CEO, entrepreneur. That's pretty much what you need to know and what you need to watch out for.
There's actually an interesting thing that's happening in the industry right now. People are going through some challenges as more and more of what we do moves to the cloud. And some people may be on the cloud and not even quite realize it. If they're on Office 365 with Microsoft now, they're in the cloud. We rely less and less on servers in our own buildings. And the people who have traditionally taken care of those servers for us, we like to call them our IT guys or our sysadmins, they have to undergo a transformation and learn how to manage these things in the cloud. And it's a different lifestyle for them, from managing physical machines to managing virtual resources in the clouds. And some of them love it, embrace it, and do great. And some of them resist it.
Yeah.
So if you're having these conversations with your IT people, try having the conversations with a number of other people as well, just to compare notes and see what kind of advice you get from different sources.
Yeah, and we will talk about that as we get down into the web area as well, to your website. We'll talk about developer preferences and how to deal with them. Mm-hmm. And I think that's going to be a whole other thing we talk about in the next one of our next segments, is just how to manage the people who manage your site.
Right.
Okay, so we have the hosts where they host your site or your domain. So you need to make sure you have a full understanding of that and access to it. And then on the website itself, you actually build the site typically nowadays on a platform. So it's not as common as it used to be, where a developer would build the site from scratch using code.
Yeah, a lot of people have done an awful lot of good work on our behalf to make it much more effective, much easier to build a very nice, very compelling web presence without having your own designers and coders and all the people pushing around the nuts and bolts of these things. They've got tremendously rich template libraries, pre-built sites that you can adapt. I've been very impressed. I built a couple of them myself, and I'm kind of away from the tech for a while, but I stood up a pretty nice website on Wix in the course of an afternoon. So yeah, depending on what you need from your web presence, there's a lot that you can do without having to build it all yourself.
Yeah, and one of the most common platforms, which is how I think of these types of tools, is WordPress, which started out as a blogging environment and ended up being the tool that people use, the environment people use for building their sites. And it's nice because any business owner, once it's set up, can come in and be taught to say, okay, here's where your pictures are. Here are the things you need to say about your pictures so Google recognizes them. Here's where your content is. You save it, you publish it, you put pictures in, whatever, but it's pretty straightforward. So for example, a small retail company that wants to just do their own editing and load their own pictures of their products and not have to depend on a programmer every time they want to do that. WordPress and other programs like that make it possible.
It does. There's a bit of a tiering even in that space. I mean, this is consistent across the market. So yeah, WordPress gives you probably the best combination of flexibility and simplicity, because you can do pretty much everything you need to do if you have somebody who's capable, but you can also do an awful lot out of the box with templates and with things that are done for you. Mm-hmm. I mentioned Wix before. There's a whole family of platforms like that are much more oriented to just using their building blocks and not doing the customization. Mm-hmm. People will talk about Wix, they'll talk about Shopify, they'll talk about Square, and each one of them has its own sort of angle on what it's doing for you. And you can create presences in all of these, and you just have to figure out what the different specialties are and which one works best for your particular need. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But WordPress is the first step down towards giving you a lot of programmer-like flexibility. Mm-hmm.
And WordPress has the bulk of the market for sure. And then they have I guess it's a plugin. I don't know if WooCommerce is a plugin or if it's,
Yes.
okay. So there are a lot of plugins, which are other application programs that work with WordPress. And they're vetted by WordPress, and so they should work. One of the tricks with plugins is if you update a plugin, it can affect other things on the site. So quality control and quality assurance is really important. When you do something new on your site, or whoever's working for you, you need to test it again. And that's not just automated testing and checking that way with tools, which we do for all of our clients every day, but it's also a human being going in there and knowing what to look for and popping around and just testing,
Right.
signing up or reading this or clicking on that and making sure everything works.
It's an activity that almost universally gets less attention than it needs and deserves, which is testing, which is making sure that everything that you do, somebody has gone through and tested not only what you changed, but everything else as well, to make sure that whatever you changed didn't have a ripple effect on that. It's a very, very important activity. And it's easy sometimes to just skip over it because you'll make a change and it looks good and you'll move on, which is the way we all kind of want to just do things.
Yeah.
But the way these things work and the way these things are built, there's enough interdependencies that you can break something. And you just have to make sure that you budget in the time for the testing.
Yeah, there's something called CSS that your programmers will throw around. It means cascading style sheets. And it's a way of defining that your headlines always appear in Helvetica 14, or not 14 point, but like 20 point or whatever. So it sets up all the font rules for your site. And you can change a plugin somewhere and it can interact with CSS. And then you've got a little mess on your hands.
Yep. Yep.
Okay, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so, getting back to the tiers I was talking about before, one of the things to remember with WordPress, and a lot of people will push WordPress because it is the right balance, as I said, between being able to customize things and being able to make it easy, is you really want somebody in that situation who knows WordPress really well to set up the platform that you can then, as an individual user like me, use effectively without breaking things. I can post new information. I can make changes as long as I follow the way it wants to work without breaking things, because the people who built it and maintain it for me make sure that everything's in there that I need.
Yeah, and that also brings up the concept that there are two kinds of programmers now out there. Those that are still holding on to, and you talked about this earlier, they're still holding on to custom code.
Mm-hmm.
They want to create things a certain way, the way they learned it. And they're not really that excited about templates. And they're the ones who will tell you, and a template is basically a pre-formatted site. You know, it's got certain style and ways that it treats the elements and things like that. They'll tell you that the template creates a bloated site that's going to be slow to load, which you can overcome with a lot of good programming and tools and so on. So that's, you know, one more second is, or half a second isn't going to kill you. It's true that Google pays attention to load time. It's one of its criteria, but it's nowhere near as bad as programmers will tell you. So try to go the template way, because the good thing about that is if you use a template, then the next programmer that you use, and in your business life, you're probably going to talk to more than one or two or three programmers, can go in and kind of figure out what's going on. If a programmer programs something and doesn't document it very well for the next
Hard for someone else to pick that up.
And they seldom do. They just do what they do.
And there's a natural tendency for any new developer who picks something up to find all sorts of fault with whatever the last developer did, no matter who that last developer was.
Yeah.
And you can have a contractor come to your house to install a window or something, and he'll spend 20 minutes explaining to you how the prior contractor screwed up everything else in the house. So it just happens. So sticking with templates helps. There will be situations where your website people will say, if you want that thing that you just described, the template won't allow that. We'll have to do something custom. It does happen.
Yes.
That's just a fact of life.
Yep.
I think the larger lesson to take away from that point is to always stay focused on what you really want out of the site or the app that you're building.
Mm-hmm.
There could be good reasons why performance is important and you need to spend weeks tweaking it so that it's very fast. There are reasons for that.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you have a very large audience of people. Maybe you have a lot of people using it at the same time. But then there's often times where it doesn't really matter. That extra second or two of loading doesn't really affect your business. It's important to stay focused on what the goal of the end product is and not how to get there. And we've all experienced this with hiring people. There's different classes of people, and those who are focused on the goal and like achieving the goal. And then there's those who are focused on the process and like the work of getting there. And sometimes will tend to overthink things. So you always have to stay focused on what it is you want out of it in the end. And that can cut both ways.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think one of the most difficult things about managing your digital presence is you don't know what's important.
Right.
And you can't manage without knowing what's important, because the leader of the company is the one that says, no, that's not a big deal right now. We're going to do this. This is our main focus. That's
Right.
Leadership. And
Exactly.
you can't do that if a programmer is telling you, oh, well, if you use that, that's going to take 5 seconds to load. You'll be petrified, and it may not matter.
Yep. And it does go both ways. And I think we'll probably get into this later, maybe in another session when we start talking about the differences in what you're trying to achieve on the web. But suffice it to say that there's a very broad terrain between, I want a website that just presents my business to the public and shows what the store looks like and what we do, and that's about it, and Airbnb. And there can be a temptation to just view them as being similar because they're both on the web. And there are plenty of people out there who will come and tell you that they can build you Airbnb with WordPress, but they can't.
I'm really glad you went that way, because that's where I was hoping we were going to go.
Okay. Yeah, and we could go very far down that road. But
No, I know, but
that's kind of what I meant when I was talking about knowing what your goal is and understanding, and then listening to the people who are trying to, explain what the ramifications of that are.
I want to give you a chance, because I know we talked about this a little bit before we got on camera, and you were talking about the different types of sites in sort of a graduated levels, and it starts with static and it ends with the Airbnb total. Yeah. Okay, so let's, if you would talk about that for a few seconds. That would be great.
When we first started getting into the web in the 90s, the initial focus was just presenting yourself to the world over the web. And the general approach was a static website. And by static, I mean, it presents information, but you can't really do anything there. It just shows your business, it shows your products, it shows you whatever it wants to show. It's your presence to the world. And it's a very important thing to have and a very valuable thing to have. And in and of itself, it's useful. It lets the world know who you are. There's all sorts of opportunity, though, once you now have customers coming to your website, to give them things to do there, to give them services. You can sell them things, which is obviously the first step of the internet was that. Now you can buy things in there. And there's a very well understood process of putting up a catalog of products and letting people buy them and letting people return them and ask questions through email and such. The term e-commerce site is used pretty loosely, but often that's kind of what that means. It's just a place to go sell things, but it's still, by and large, one way. You're presenting products and people are buying them. And now it's so much easier to do these things than it used to be, because there's third parties that will handle credit cards for you, all these platforms. It's surprisingly easy from a technical standpoint to set these things up. From a sales and marketing standpoint, it still takes a lot of work and a lot of creativity, but that's a whole different activity. But from a technical standpoint, it's surprisingly easy to build these things now. Security has been handled for us, so that's all great. But then the next step is to say, well, if my customers are coming to my business online, how can I interact with them in a more productive way? How can I let them, for example, do some self-service, take care of their own accounts? How can I let them do business with me over the internet instead of having to come to my store or pick up the phone and call me? And it's an enormous breadth of opportunities and things out there. And if you kind of walk through your normal day nowadays, you realize how many different times you interact with a business. You do business with people on your phone, on the web, without even much thinking about it anymore. You're doing your banking, you're contacting your home service company to schedule an appointment to repair your heater. All those things we do almost without thinking now on the web. And we actually get a little bit annoyed if the company that we're dealing with doesn't let us do that. Or it falls short in some way, and we develop an opinion about the fact that, gee, they don't let me go and check the status of my order online, and then we run over and we'll maybe post something on social media about that. So there's enormous expectation. Well, when you make that transition from selling things out of a catalog to now doing your business with your customers interactively over the web, you're getting to much more specialized territory. There's no template, I don't think anyway, for a home heating services company to manage somebody's home infrastructure. That's a very specialized thing. And you'll find yourself, if you want to do those things, you have to build something much more custom to start doing that. And you can follow that thread all the way down to the Twitters and the Airbnbs and the Ubers and all these massively complex businesses that have at their core some sort of massively complex, massively scalable technology infrastructure. They have a lot of other things wrapped around it as well. Uber is way more than a technology company. It's a political company. It's everything else. But that technology is a very critical part of what they do. So you have to see what your path is digitally and try and figure out where you are on that path and where you want to get to be.
So when we talked about this earlier, there's static, then the next level up is, it's sort of like an online brochure. The next level up is e-commerce. Mm-hmm. Next level up from that is self-service on your e-commerce, or even if it's not an e-commerce site. And then there's the whole relationship between you and the company and what they're doing with your information, and you being able to go in and change things and check on things and track things, see what you've bought before and order it again and things like that. This brings us to the next point, which is the difference between a website and an application.
I knew you were heading that. Yeah, it's actually interesting because our industry, like every other industry before, is filled with jargon, and we use words without really thinking about the fact that we're using them. But that's sort of something to listen for when you're talking to someone, either about what they want, or if you're the one who wants it and you're talking about somebody who can give it to you, is this transition from talking about a website to a web application. And an application means really you're doing something interactively and constructively. And that carries a lot, excuse me, carries a lot of weight with it, because it's not just what that thing is doing with your customer over the internet, but what is it required to do that? How does it need to reach into your back office and to perhaps the legacy inventory system that you've been running, or your warehouse management system? What does it need to do in order to present that capability to your customer? Sometimes a simple, I want to know the status of my order, pulls along this long chain of work to find out where that information is, what internal system it's running on, how do I get to that system? Is there a way to talk to it? Is there what we call an API, an application programming interface? You'll hear that term all the time.
Yeah.
Get that information. If not, do I need to build that? How do I build that? There's a tremendous chain of work involved in getting that piece of information to somebody, and you have to be prepared for what it's going to take to do that.
Yeah, integration is a big deal now, because one of the side effects of the cloud is that we're all using a variety of applications. I mean, if you think about it, if you think that your banking is one application and every store you go to is really another application, how many times a day do you use even Google Docs and Google Sheets and all of that, where we've gotten used to working out on the web? My entire company is run virtually that way. So you're into dozens of apps, and the more they talk to each other, the more useful they are. So if I do something in FreshBooks where I'm invoicing a client, I want that automatically to be reflected in QuickBooks, which is where I happen to keep all the information for my accountant. And I want it to be updated automatically, and I want my banking information to go in there as well. And that's what those APIs, application programming interface,
right.
That's where they come into play.
But you've also hit on an interesting point, which is, as consumers in the marketplace, we've grown to expect more and more and more of this and get annoyed when it's not there.
Definitely.
When those consumers are your customers and they're asking you, why can't they do this with your product? That's a huge burden. You didn't necessarily ask for that burden. You weren't planning on providing those capabilities, but the market has raised those expectations. And all it takes is one competitor to say, well, I can do that, and to provide that capability. And now you're kind of caught in a competitive situation where you have to figure out how to respond to that.
Yeah, that's a really good point, especially for baby boomer business owners
Right.
who are up against some young punk that comes in the market and gets funding and suddenly can start with the end in mind. And it goes back to your comment about your goals. So if they, instead of sort of graduating through these steps of static and then e-commerce and then relationship, they just start out that way. They say, okay, how can we be as much like Amazon as possible and make our site up to the standard that all consumers have now expected? I don't care if you're in business to business or business to consumer, that's the bar that has been set, not within your industry necessarily, but across the board with all the Amazons of the world.
There's an unfortunate term on the business side of all this, and I say unfortunate from the perspective of people who've been subjected to it, and that's disruption. We love to talk about businesses that are disruptive. That's exactly what you're describing. Is I've got my business. I've been doing this for 25 years. I provide this service to my customers. They've been happy. I'm a very good business. I'm doing a great job, and I do it a certain way. And then someone else comes along and says, well, how could I do that differently with all of this technology that's at my disposal now?
Yeah.
Why do you have to log into your site? Why can't it just be on the phone or whatever? And they get funded, or however they do it, they come to market with their new way of doing things. And even though there really wasn't anything wrong with the way I was doing, and I was doing a really good job of servicing my customers, now their expectations shift. We have the experience, we have a client in the shipping industry, and without getting into too much detail, there's just a certain way of doing things in that business that people are used to doing. It started with phones and telexes, and slowly over the years, certain technologies built up, but still considered very much a person-to-person business. And most shippers and logistics companies tended to work a certain way. And then the startup came along about 2 years ago, I guess, very well-funded startup. And they just rethought the whole thing, and they put it all in the cloud, and they incorporated, I think they've got machine learning in there, and I think they've got blockchain in there. They're hitting all the newest technologies. Whether or not it's actually good is one thing, and time needs to tell that, but they're telling a great story. And now their very existence is putting pressure on other people in this industry to answer, well, why don't you do that? They do that, why don't you do that? And it's not necessarily a pleasant conversation to have with your customers to say, but everything's been fine.
Yeah, and I think the word that goes with disruption, sadly, is irrelevancy. And I can't tell you, I mean, you've been in tech, you and I have both been in tech for decades, and I have, having worked in Silicon Valley for at least 3 of those 4 decades in my case, I can't tell you how many businesses I saw who were perfectly good, they did a great job, they served their customers, and they became irrelevant because they did not really embrace the way things were going. It's like the buggy whip guy just absolutely saying, no, everybody's still going to be in horses. Nobody's going to do those smelly, terrible, noisy machines.
There's a long history of quotes about that.
Yeah. And it's just, it is a reality. And when you're faced with it, when you're standing there and you're running your business and you've got a million things to do, and you're just like, excuse me? And that's when a baby boomer wants to put the covers over their heads and just go retire. And you don't have to. You really can make the switch. You just have to realize it will take an investment, not only in money, but learning and being able to because all this stuff is learnable. I keep reminding people of that. We weren't born knowing this. So you really have to take that hard decision and say, okay, I'm definitely going to be in business for another 5, 10, 15 years. And I do not want to be left behind.
No, and that's the value of you doing this for your audience, is it's a chance for them to understand what it is they have to learn. You made a really good point with your buggy whip example, because it's not that disruption is a new thing. It's been throughout history.
It's happening faster.
Go on about examples. But I think the difference now is it happens more quickly.
Yeah,
You said
exactly.
it happening faster.
Yeah.
Not only is it happening faster, but because of the existence of the internet and the cloud and all that, you can scale out instantly. You don't start a little shop in Ohio building, this thing that might fly, and then years go by. You come up with an idea, you build your app, you put it on the cloud up in Amazon or something, and 3 weeks later, customers across the country or around the world are exposed to your new way of doing things. It can be a little bit daunting.
Yeah. And the good news is if you are willing, and I can't make this point enough, you just have to just put your own biases and the way we always did it aside and just say, okay, I'm going to start fresh. And when you're in your 50s, 60s, it doesn't feel very natural to start fresh.
No, no.
Because the other problem is you're getting into an area that you know this much and you've been used to knowing this much.
That's right.
And so it's a very humbling experience.
Oh,
I'm humbled every day.
Yeah, me too. And in all sorts of categories, from my car yelling at me all the time when I used to myself when I was young, and now I don't know what to. We all face that. It just, to your point, you have to sort of have an open mind and say, this is something I think I should deal with, and I think I should get comfortable with. How do I get comfortable with this? What information do I need? And one of the harder aspects, I think, of this is it's not fair to expect anybody in a business that isn't technology to suddenly become a technology expert. No, it's not a fair expectation. Finding the right experts to talk to is the challenge, and in part because our business is, unfortunately, it's gotten a lot better, but it's unfortunately still a bit of a Wild West out here with people doing the things that we're talking about and talking a good game but not playing well. You can pretty much get by in legal and financial and business and accounting and all those domains. There's such well-established practitioners and well-established practices, and you can see the commercial for BDO with all these people looking so impressive. And you can generally find a reliable advisor or partner in those spaces, and whether there's a difference between BDO and KPMG, I'm sure there is, but you can pretty much rely on both of them to tell you the right things. In technology, there's just too many people out there who are prone to, I don't know, hyperbole, exaggeration, self-aggrandizement. There's not enough yet uniformity or stability in the market. So you can get bad advice.
Well, and the good news is I have seen in the baby boomer business owners that we've been working with, when by the time they come to us, they have completely disregarded the companies that are overpromising.
Good.
And I know you've told me a million times how many emails you get every day, and I do too. I can put you on page 1 of Google in 2 weeks, kind of thing.
Oh, God knows, yes. I love when they send emails to the email on my website telling me how bad my website is and how much better to do it. Like, okay, sure, I'm going to listen to you.
Yeah. So I think that ideas travel and people learn things. As an example, this is the weirdest thing. I have a phone number that is 1 digit off from a company called Rhode Island Imaging, and they have people do CAT scans, and they're that kind of company. And they've grown since we've been here 22 years, and they've gotten pretty big. And so there's a lot of people calling every single day for 22 years now. At least once or twice or 3 times a day, I get a call from somebody who starts out by saying, "Hi, my doctor referred you to meet you because I need a CAT scan." And I stop them right away, HIPAA and all that. I don't want to know.
Please don't share.
Yeah, and I've learned how to say, it's 4-3 to 2400. Okay. The thing that's interesting is about a year and a half ago, and I'm up to my 10,000 call by now. I'm trying to be really patient with everybody. About a year and a half ago, people would stop, and I've been answering the phone the same way. "This is Kristin, can I help you?" kind of thing. They stop and they say, "Wait, is this Rhode Island Imaging?" Nobody said anything. Nobody put a big sign up on the bill, on I-95 and said, "Oh, when you call Kristin by mistake, you got to say that." It's the weirdest thing. So ideas really do travel.
Mhm.
And I think that people have gone through a metamorphosis. When they first started out, they were using their nephew, and then they got past that because he couldn't do what they needed, and they ran into problems. And so then they gravitate, and now they're understanding. They've come to see who the shysters are.
Yeah, and even shyster, there are plenty of shysters in this business, just as there are in every other business, but it's even less of a shyster. You said something good there when you mentioned the nephew. And I say that a lot too. Oh, I got a nephew who can build this. I think the challenge has been in this space when it comes to web presence, digital presence, web. An individual can achieve the appearance of success pretty quickly.
Mm.
It's the classic 80% rule. They're always 80% done. For 3 years, they'll be 80% done. Because the tools and the techniques and the mechanisms are such that you can sort of just do that. I could myself build something that looks complete, but I'm not really a developer anymore. It's not really complete, but you can get a certain distance down. It's not like, having somebody come in and build your warehouse. There's a certain set of skills and tools and experiences that you require to do that. And we all, because they're physical things, we can all kind of look at that and say, I believe you can build a warehouse, or I'm not convinced you can build a warehouse. When it comes to building a digital presence, it is a little too easy to get something done that looks good.
That's true. Yeah.
Capable. But if the person that you're dealing with doesn't really understand what your goal is and what your vision is, and doesn't understand what the ramifications of your vision are, because you shouldn't be expected to understand that. You're not expected to know, well, to do that requires integration to this back office IBM. I forgot what those things were called now. What are the old IBMs called?
Oh, the mainframes?
No, the small ones that everybody has.
Oh, the micro.
How mighty have fallen, huh? Some old IBM system.
Yeah, exactly.
You should not be expected to know those things. Just like, if you had somebody put an extension on your building, it's not up to you to know that, oh, the sewer line passes underneath the conference room. They'll have to tell you that. Right. And they'll explain it to you, and you'll go, oh, okay. And that's the relationship you have with somebody who's going to build your building or build an extension, or the relationship you'll have with your lawyers. You'll listen to, and they'll advise you. But there's too many people in our space who will come in blowing smoke, and it's just hard to tell that they're doing that. And you just need to find someone that you can trust, whether it's by doing research and watching things like this, or talking to people that who've had other successes, and learning to filter out the people like your nephew who say, I can do that, but can't really. And I'm not disparaging anybody's nephew. Some people probably have.
No, I have some
nephews. I'm somebody's nephew. So I got to be careful how I say that. But I think your point is very well taken. You have to be able to hear what the advisors and the service providers are saying, and do your own processing as to whether you think that they really know what they're doing.
Yeah, and I think we're going to devote a session to that, finding good vendors, what to ask and what to look for. But I will say this, as a general rule, if someone basically says, don't worry your little head about it, dear, okay, you don't have a good vendor. They should want you to understand. They should go out of their way to help you understand. They should be totally transparent about why they're doing it. And you should be diagramming everything with them. It's the best language when you're talking to tech people, because even when they say, oh, you can't do that, I can't tell you how many conference rooms I've stood in and said, okay, all right, I understand you say you can't do that, but let's just diagram it.
Let's draw a picture. Oh, yeah.
And then you diagram it and you say, well, now can't we just take this and put this over here, and won't that, and they're like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, I guess you can. So diagram it, work it out, get it goal-based, but logical steps that you go through to either make it, or here's how it's supposed to work, or start with the customer's end goal in mind, because you keep bringing up the business goal, but there's also the customer goal.
Well, yeah, I guess to me that sort of goes without saying is your business goal should have your customer's goals in mind, but that's your end of the business. But yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
What do you want your customer to be able to achieve? What experience do you want them to have? And as you've said in many of your talks, you have to listen to them to find that out. But it's interesting what you're saying about drawing the pictures in the conference room and all that. I've never really thought about it much before, but how much time I spend trying to instill fear in people. which is not necessarily a nice way to do it, but really what you're trying to do is get people to understand the depth of where they're headed. And, you know, there's rocky shoals and you have to navigate around them, and you can't just go in this headlong. You've got to really have a healthy fear of, what do I need to do to get to a successful conclusion?
Yeah, that's a good point. So if somebody's glib,
Yeah.
don't. I mean, this is serious business. And I know that in closing here, we're going to talk just a minute about applications, because we will go into a lot more detail about that going forward, I think.
Oh, yes.
But just so people understand the complexity, in addition to the integration issues that we've been talking about, where everything has to talk to everything else, and you need to exchange data with your new website setup, and new e-commerce system has to go back to your old legacy system. There's also just the fact that there are dozens of devices that people are using to access the web.
That's right.
So there's your desktop computer, there's kiosks, there's obviously your mobile phone, which is going up like crazy. And then which mobile phone? There's 20 or 30 or 40 of them, old ones still, you know, that people are using. So when we talk about testing, you have to be able to go in, and there's a tool in Chrome, and I'll have to bring it up in one of our next sessions, but there's a way to see how your site looks.
Oh, yeah, those are hugely valuable tools. There's tools that do that for sites, there's tools that do that for phones. It's very valuable testing. And you've hit on, again, this is a subject of a whole another session, but it's not just the web anymore. When you're talking about your business reaching your customers out in the world, not in your store, you have to be on the web, meaning on their desktop browser and work, and on their phones and on their tablets. And in many cases, on a kiosk in your store, if you're kind of that kind of business. Maybe it's some physical devices in their homes. It's their thermostats. It all depends on what your business is, but you have to ask yourself, where are all the places where I touch my customer or they touch us? And how can I interact with them in a way that makes them want to continue to do business with me?
Yeah, exactly.
So it is an enormous scale. And I guess what we're saying is, in all of this, is if something's worth doing for your business, it's probably hard. And it's hard.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And that's true of so many other things that we do. Marketing is hard. What you guys do is just hard, and it never ends. Digital technology is hard. If somebody's telling you it's not, if somebody's telling you it's easy, that's
a big red flag.
You can be another Airbnb in 3 weeks. You have to question is like, does that really make sense?
Yeah.
And there are people who would tell you that, and they would believe it. Because as a practitioner, they believe that they can do that. You just have to be a little more critical in your listening and your thinking when people are describing this. It is hard. It is hard to transform your business to doing things differently than you're used to and differently than your customers are used to. And then you have to bring your customers along as well.
Yeah.
Because in your effort to avoid losing new customers because some other disruptive company is taking your customers away in a certain way, you don't want to alienate your existing customers who actually like the way you do business.
Yeah.
All of that is just hard, and you have to accept that it's a process to go through. It can actually be a hell of a lot of fun. It can be very rewarding. When the first time you see somebody in public using your mobile app to do something, is actually
very
fun.
Exciting.
It's exciting. It's fun. Or when the orders start coming in that way, or when your first IoT product goes in the field and you're getting back data from your customers, and you're revealing insights you never knew. And we've got one customer we've worked with. We're putting intelligent oil level gauges on oil tanks in people's homes to make it so that they only get deliveries when they need them, because a tremendous number of truck rolls of oil trucks go out to houses to fill up at tanks that aren't empty, and you just waste a lot. A simple little thing like that, and they go back at the end of 6 or 9 months and they look at their spreadsheets and they realize they'd saved $300,000 in 6 months. You can do things like that, and it's actually very exciting. You just have to accept that there's a process to get in there.
Yeah, and I have to mention IoT means Internet of Things.
Oh, sorry. Jargon.
That's all right.
That's probably the subject of yet another session.
Oh yes, absolutely. It's
But yes, your products can talk back to you from the
Right.
field, and they can talk
Exactly.
to your customers. There's all sorts of opportunities.
Yeah.
By the way, speaking of technology, AS400 was what I was trying to think of before.
Oh, right. The AS400. Yes.
There are
Right.
still thousands of them running in people's back offices doing valuable work. And
Yes.
sometimes you need to talk to them. But it's sort of ironic that I couldn't remember that, but that used to be the thing.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah.
now it's like I couldn't remember it. So
Well, it's a buggy whip, and in some ways you still need it, but
yeah.
All right. Well, this has been fun as usual. We thought we were going to go shorter, but we went almost an hour again. Oh well. It's the way
Always a
it is.
pleasure.
Yeah, same here.
I look forward to our next one.
Me too. Thank you, Frank.
Bye, Kristin.